It's great to see so many people here. I'm Chris Ball, the head of the Education Library. It seems fitting in the year of teacher education to have an event to gather all the school libraries and librarians together and talk about what we do, because they play a key part in supporting students. In fact, we were just talking before the event started about how so much of what librarians have been doing for years with teacher-centered learning and inquiry and all these things that we are giving new names to have actually been going on for years, and librarians have been doing it for years. But somewhere along the line, we don't use the L word anymore when we talk about those things. So maybe we can reestablish some of those connections today when we're talking about how school librarians are supporting teachers and providing access to all these resources and teaching students about the information that they're accessing and thinking critically about where they're getting it from. This is what we've been doing all along, whether it's on a shelf or online. It's helping people navigate their way around what's happening. So I can't think of a more appropriate year or a more appropriate time to have a National School Librarians Day. And before I go too far on, I want to acknowledge that we are having our event at UBC the way we always are on native, unceded Musqueam territory. And it's always been land where learning has been happening. And I hope that events like this just continue on that tradition. It's good to remember where we're standing, though. We have 3 speakers here today, and I want to personally thank all 3 of you for finding your way here through the fog. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. We have Ruben Brone from the BC Ministry of Education. We've got Gino Bondi from the Vancouver School Board, and Patricia Finley, who's a school library leader and teacher librarian in the Burnaby School District. So thank you very much for coming. And I'm just going to let things get started right away and turn it over to Joanne and let her do a proper introduction of our first speaker. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Chris. So I'm delighted to welcome you to our School Library Day Colloquium. We have had this event, I think, for the last 10 years, and October is Libraries Month in British Columbia, and as part of the International Association of School Librarianship, it was decided many years ago to actually dedicate one day, and now it's turned into a month, where we focus on school libraries. And this has been a tradition that we have shared with the UBC iSchool, and we thank them for their collaborative efforts in making this event happen. I do want to, just before introducing our panel, though, I really wanted to be sure that I wanted to acknowledge members of our audience. And Danielle Wynn is a colleague of ours from the Education Library, so I just wanted to be sure people knew her and saw her. And I would also want to highlight that our university librarian is here, the English panel, and also Leonora Kramer, who is our head of public services for us. So thank you very much to all of you for coming. And the Teacher Education Office, Dr. Keith McPherson is here, and Dr. Rod Brown. Rod, you want to raise your hand? Oh, he's fit. Okay, all right. I saw him earlier, so I really wanted to welcome him too. Our panel today is focusing on BC's new education plan. And it's a very exciting education plan, and you should have a handout. And on that handout, we've indicated on the back side of the sheet a link to the vision and the video and the information about BC's new education plan. But we really wanted to have a deeper discussion and explanation and thinking about that plan in its relationship to school libraries. So I'm very delighted that as part of our panel, we have Ruben Brone, who's the Executive Director of Strategic Innovation for the BC Ministry of Education, who has joined with us. And his responsibilities are to liaise with BC faculties of education and support teacher engagement. For 9 years, he's worked with the BC Government's Public Affairs Bureau. And some of the things that he's written about that really intrigued me was the Data BC web portal and the province's open information site. He is a self-confessed connector of dots, a stuff thinker upper, a writer, a simplifier, a wonderer. And so I really think have some real sharing with you. He says, I think about things like how we communicate, how we create, how we change, and how we can do these things better. So he holds the unique distinction of being the only public servant described by the deputy minister as the human thesaurus. So I'd like to have you help me in welcoming Reuben Bromley.
Thank you. And there's a bit on there that actually I was quite surprised by. I think it mentions there that I'm also a popular children's entertainer, which surprised me because I have children. And as I said to Joanne, I have children and they sometimes find me entertaining, but I didn't know my fame had spread that far and wide. And I figured out because we were late in sort of getting a bio. I'm a bit of a last-minute stand-in. And so we were late in getting a bio. And so she did what all good event organizers do. We'll just Google the guy and find out who he is. And so that actually, I figured that out. I Googled it. And so that was when I did a course for our own ministry staff on communication and persuasion and change and that kind of stuff. And there was a reference in there to what can a popular children's entertainer teach us about persuasion, which wasn't a reference to me. It was a reference to Mr. Rogers. And there's a great video of him testifying before a Senate committee back in like the 60s, in which he, in the course of about 10 minutes, convinces them to give public television a whole bunch of money that they didn't want to give them. It's a great video. If you've never watched it, watch it. That's my plug for Mr. Rogers. And that's my explanation of the children's entertainer bit. So this is great, and I'm really happy that we're having this discussion about the education plan. And we talk about it as the new education plan, although it's been around for about 2 years now. And it's an ongoing piece of work, and it may never end. And if Rod Allen, who's the superintendent of learning for the ministry, was here, he would tell you that, it probably never will end. And he always gets the question from ministers, well, when will we know that it's done? When will the system be transformed? When will you be finished? And his standard answer, he has this picture of a little girl that's about 5 or 6 looking wide-eyed into this goldfish bowl. And he says, we'll know that we're done when the kids coming out of grade 12 have that same expression as this girl does when she's in kindergarten or grade 1. And his point is, we're never probably really going to get there, but we'll certainly try. And well, someone like Rod, who's an experienced educator, could speak to you about the sort of the nuts and bolts and the deep concepts behind the transformation that's happening. I can tell you that in essence what it is about taking a system that's about 100 years old and trying to keep up with where people are actually taking it now. And this is important to us from the ministry perspective. We didn't come out with this plan and say, hey, we've got this great idea that's going to rock your world doing stuff you never thought of before as educators. You should understand this. Actually, what it is a response to some really remarkable work that is happening all over BC's education system in pockets. There are remarkable teachers who are at the forefront of a new way of learning and a new way of teaching and setting a wonderful example for others all across the province and for jurisdictions around the world. There are tremendous schools that are embracing that. There are tremendous districts around the province that are actually at the forefront of this. And so the Ed Plan is our actual response to what we know is already happening. It's our response to trying to bring the entire system and help it to keep pace with where we think it can and should be. And a lot of the work that I do is around answering, you talked about sort of borrowed from, I think it's my Twitter bio, or something where I talk about connecting dots. And a lot of my work is thinking about that question of how do we actually get outside of the education system, our broader community, our broader province, to keep pace with that idea. Because we've spent the better part of 100 years saying education works this way. This is how school works. This is what a school is. This is what an education system does. And in the broad public consciousness, there's a very sort of defined picture of what school is. And for a lot of us who are parents of children who are now into the system, we still expect school to be that. We expect it to be what it was when I graduated 20-odd years ago, right? And yet as my kid who's now in grade 1, my oldest son, I'm realizing it's not that anymore. And then I hear the conversations with educators around the province and within the ministry, and I think, and it's not even going to be close to what it is now one day. And that fascinates me. But I'm also conscious of the fact of how do we bring along that social and cultural change, not just in the system, but outside the system. And why I think that's relevant for you is that the same thing applies very much in your world. I'm sure there's nothing I can tell you about libraries. I'm going to tell you some stuff about what I think about libraries. But I'm sure there's nothing I can tell you that people in this room don't already think about libraries. And I think we've already touched on a few of those to begin with. At that sort of intro comment about, what libraries are and what they always have been, I thought, well, I can just go, because that's kind of what I think. But I've had this remarkable opportunity to work with my recent colleague, now former colleague, Jacqueline. And we had a series of great conversations over the year and a half or so that we worked together, where we just kind of got together and talked about what are libraries and what are they really, and how does that fit within this. And it's really opened my eyes and my thinking in a lot of ways, and great opportunity for me to bounce off someone who's a very thoughtful librarian, library educator, thinker about, does this make sense? Because these are kind of thoughts that seem to me to fit very, very well. But the challenge, of course, is that just last week I was reading yet another article about the time for libraries has passed. We have these. You don't need libraries anymore, right? And I just, people are missing the point. Obviously, you believe that and understand that and get that. But the challenge then for you, not just as part of the education transformation, but as the community of libraries, is that same thing. How do you shift people's understanding? For better or worse, the public view of libraries is not libraries as you understand it. It's the place where we put books, or maybe DVDs, right? It's that very sort of stereotypical traditional view of libraries. And that's not true. But how do we change that? Because libraries actually are very different now, and they're very different from what they used to be. But the core of it is still very much the same. And so there's a parallel for me there between the work that we're trying to do in terms of transforming the thinking around education and transforming the thinking around libraries. When I think about when I was a kid, I have two very vivid memories about libraries when I was my son's age, about 6. Growing up in the little town of Shawnigan Lake on Vancouver Island, which is about 45 minutes north of Victoria. When I lived there, it was a real little town. I remember kindergarten. I had a bright yellow book bag. It was like sort of the briefcase style, bright yellow, sort of metallic yellow. And I remember packing that back and forth to school all the time, and how much I loved that book bag, and how in grade 1, when the seam split and I couldn't use it anymore, I was devastated. And I remember the little community library in Shawnigan Lake, which was a little one-room, used to be somebody's cottage, and it was converted into a library. Tiny little place, packed to the rafters with books, and I remember sitting on a little wooden stool in the corner and looking at books. And when I think about that, I think about what strikes me as I don't remember what the books were. I don't remember how I brought dozens, if not hundreds of books home in that yellow book bag. I sat in that library countless times on that little wooden stool. And I don't remember what the books were. But I remember the artifacts of that experience, because I remember the experience. And to me, that speaks to the fact that the library is an experience in learning, in exploration, and discovery. And that's the thing that resonates with me, and still resonates with me now. It's the same thing I see in my kid. When he was little, I used to tell Jacqueline this story. When he was probably a year and a half old, he started at night taking books into his bed. And the record one night, and I would come down every night and check on him when I went to bed, and there he'd be with a pile of books next to him in his bed, which just melted my heart. But then it started to get creepy because there were so many of them. And the record was 27 books one night. And he didn't do teddy bears or anything. He brought books. You can extrapolate from that all sorts of things. We could go down a total rabbit hole about being an early reader and all sorts of stuff, right? It was like by osmosis. He wanted to surround himself with this, right? To me, that's the same sort of thing. He understood even then that there was something going on here, right? There is an experience. And that's what, libraries are fundamentally have always been about. And you know this. Like I said, I'm not telling you anything new, but it's about the experience of learning. It's not about the tools of learning. It's about what happens within that space and within that experience. And so those who sort of, forecast libraries' demise are totally missing the point, obviously. Because if they're about learning, that's actually what makes them at the center of the education plan, in my view, is because the education plan is about learning. It's about shifting our perspective in our education system to the learning of the individual student. And how do you provide the flexibility for educators and for students to actually be able to learn in a way that works for them and works best for them. And that's based on all sorts of understandings that you will know about better than I do in terms of research around how kids learn in that. And Mike McKay, the superintendent out in Surrey, is always fond of saying, we know better, so when will what we know change what we do? And that's the fundamental question that we all face. A while back, I stumbled across this quote, and I wish I could tell you who it's from. I don't know. He was a cartographer. I don't even remember why I was reading blogs about cartography. It was I think I went to an exhibit at the Royal BC Museum. They had a special exhibit on maps, and somehow I ended up on my lunch hour Googling map stuff, and I came across this, and I've always remembered it, the notion that a map is an answer to a question. And I think you can very easily transfer that over and say that a library is an answer to a question. It's not a place where you just answer your questions. It's actually a response to something. And I think all the sort of longest lasting, most enduring artifacts and pieces of our culture actually reflect that. I think you can say the same thing about museums, right? They're not a place where you keep stuff. They're an answer to a question. Maps are an answer to a question. Libraries. I would like public services to be an answer to a question. That's a whole other topic. But I think government can and should be an answer to a question. And I think it's not, the question that it answers is not, where do we put the books, right? It's actually something much more fundamental about who we are and how we function as a society and what we hope to achieve together. Because as was talked about, libraries have long been centers of the exact kind of qualities that we aspire to now ensure permeate our schools and our education system. You know, they're all about collaboration, discovery, sharing, inquiry, not just asking questions, but understanding how to ask questions, as opposed to just a place where you go to find answers to questions. They're these great collaborative, inclusive, open, both literally and figuratively, spaces and environments that enable personalization, that enable community learning. All the things we are now talking about in the Ed Plan that we aspire our schools to become more like. I heard this line somewhere too, that libraries effectively serve to fulfill the potential of participation, right, which I think is a wonderful concept. And again, that's the same idea that permeates education. It's if you're a part of this community, our goal is to help you realize that potential of what it means for you to be here. So I think, libraries are an answer to a lot of questions, but in this current context that we're dealing with, in many ways, they're an answer to the question of what do we actually want our schools to be. And I don't think we have to look outside of our schools in many instances to actually see an example of that. We just need to look down the hall. I'm going to shamelessly rip off a few ideas here from David Lenkes, who was at an wonderful event that Jacqueline organized last year. I guess it was about this time, wasn't it? And he was a speaker, and she introduced me to this great book, Expect More, about sort of his vision for what libraries can and should be. And I love this idea because I think it's very true, and it's what makes great libraries a model for every other public institution, including our schools. They're not, great libraries aren't content to just sit there and exist and wait for people to tell them they're irrelevant. And our other public institutions shouldn't be either. The same with our education. We should aspire to be more. We should aspire to be better. And I hope that's the general concept that people see embodied in the education plan, because that's really the intent behind it. Lenkes already also says this, that great libraries see the community itself as the collection. So the collection of a library is not its books, it's the community that surrounds it. Whatever kind of library you are, right? And so that'll be different in a public and community library maybe than it will be in a school library. But certainly in the school context, you think about all the people who are the network around that. They're the wealth of that library, the greatest wealth, the greatest benefit. The kids who come, the teachers, school staff, parents, grandparents, community connections, connections to community libraries. And we're seeing lots of innovative stuff happening around that. I think that's a wonderful concept that, again, is a model for our whole education system, right? It's actually about the community, not about the content. And then there's the question of where do librarians stand in this? And I think that's the tremendous challenge, right? Is on the one hand, as we already talked about off the top, the great librarians are the ones who've always understood this as the role. And they're the ones who are willing to change and adapt and challenge and question and try something new, bring in new things into the world of the library experience. And that's the same is true about the great people who are really driving educational transformation throughout the system. Great educators, great administrators, great parent groups, great students who aren't afraid to ask questions about their educational experience. And I think that's what we need. We need those people to have the breadth and the opportunity to rise to the forefront and embrace that. And we need to give them not just the encouragement, but a sense of permission to do that. That's one of the things we seem to bump up against a lot when we go out and talk to people in the system around transformation. Is, well, that all sounds good, but we're not allowed to do that. Or you don't let us do that. And often when you poke at those things about, well, what is it that why do you think you can't do that? Well, there's this rule or that rule. And it turns out there aren't those rules. We just have a culture that is built up. It's much easier to build a culture around the reasons why we can't change than it is to build a culture around the reasons why we can and why we should. And so we need, in the library sector, just as we do in the education sector in general, people who aren't afraid to challenge, who aren't afraid to say, I don't have the answers, but I'm willing to try something new, and I'm willing to learn, and I'm willing to push some boundaries and see what happens. And I think those are increasingly what is going to sustain and drive the opportunities that are available for libraries. And and these are people who have, in a lot of ways, all the same kind of skills that we would increasingly like to see happen in teachers across the education system. And don't get me wrong. We have tremendous teachers, many of them doing really, as I said, remarkably innovative work in their practice. And this is part of our ongoing conversation that I have with the different faculties, is how do we make sure that everybody has the opportunity to continue to succeed in a different kind of system? Well, what they're going to need is the kind of skills that a lot of teacher librarians and librarians already have, right? You guys are masters of inquiry. Again, you understand not just how to answer questions, but how to ask questions, how to explore, and you have the courage to ask questions. Collaborative networkers, guides to discovery and exploration, the ability to adapt to the individual needs of individual students who come through your door, each of them with their own ambitions and ideas and thoughts that need to be supported. And most importantly, if you can just be not perpetuators of a status quo, but the genesis of something new and the willingness to challenge and do something new. That's the great potential that you have to give, not just to the library sector, but to the education sector as a whole. And all of which brings me, I think, to my the last thought I have on this is we often there's that whole question around, are libraries really still relevant? Do they still matter? And we face that in education more broadly. Is our education system today really relevant? And to a certain extent, it's easy to step back and say, well, if people are going to decide we're an old-fashioned thing, then I guess we're an old-fashioned thing, and we'll just ride it out for as long as we can and hope for the best. But the truth is, I think actually your value and relevance in any institution, in libraries like anywhere else, is determined by you. It's determined by your willingness and ability to actually demonstrate and surprise people with what you actually can do and what you can offer. That maybe the broad perception of what libraries are isn't entirely accurate and never has been. It's not just the place we put our books. It's actually all these things and always has been, and is in many ways more relevant than ever, right? And, well, I hope it's helpful for you to hear, some guy from the Ministry of Education say that. Hope that I offer some reassurance that I sort of get your world, at least. At the same time, I'm not going to make other people see that. I can't do that. Where actually the value, where that potential comes from, is in the value that you demonstrate. And so the challenge is to, as I think you will hear from some folks who are living this and doing this when I'm done blathering on, is that the challenge is actually for you to go out and demonstrate the value. Like I say, to surprise people. To say, you know what, yeah, we got stuff, but we actually do much more than that. And have you ever thought about this? And that's not just in the, that's in the community, but it's also in that school community, it's in that district community. And there are districts and schools that get it and understand that and see that relevance. And there are ones who maybe aren't quite there. And if you need them to get there and want them to get there, that's going to probably require some courage and work on your part. And that's the exact same conversation, though, that we're trying to have across the system in general. And so, I would love to say that, we're going to be wonderful champions for libraries, and we're going to make everybody believe in you and all more than they ever have. And we'll try to do that as part of this broader discussion. But ultimately, it's going to be up to you as well to try and raise that and demonstrate what you have to offer and show people the remarkable relevance that is the reason libraries have been around for more than a little while, around a lot longer than public education, one might note. So on that thought, I will now defer to the librarian experts who are actually doing this stuff, and they can tell me if I'm just making anything up, and then I'll be happy to participate in questions later on.
I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Gino Bondi. And I have the good pleasure of meeting Gino as an exciting principal at John Oliver Secondary School. He's working with Maura Echdahl and I believe Janice Smith. And they were transforming their school library into a learning commons. And so it was fascinating to talk with a principal and a teacher librarian and sort of understand what the thinking was in that transformation process and working through with the teachers in your secondary school. Gino is a lifelong learner, and I would recommend to you to go to his blog, which is called Learning the Now. And through that blog, he demonstrates very clearly that he's, first off, a reader. And I just do not understand how he has so much time to make these really interesting comments on his blog. But it's definite that he's a passionate educator, and he is a lifelong learner. And Chris, he tells the story of trying to learn to play the guitar. Chris plays the guitar, so I thought it was a very interesting one. He believes that schools are transformative spaces that should encourage innovation through inquiry-driven, project-based, and collaborative learning experiences. He truly believes that. So I feel greatly excited to have him with us today and to have him share some of his thoughts regarding BC's new education plan and how that rolls out in a school district like Vancouver and what implications that might have for us in school.
Thank you for having me today. My boss, Maureen at the VSB, always prefaces, whenever I leave the building for a presentation, always prefaces with, make sure that you say that these opinions are yours and are not reflective of the VSB. So, and Maura's laughing, as she knows the thing. Very quickly, contexts have changed before I get into this. And what do I mean by that? I'll give you two quick examples of what I mean by context have changed. My son came up to me and said, Dad, I'm in the library all day today. I'm really excited. I said, great. He said, I need your iPad. I said, oh, wow, okay, so that's why the paper is here. He quickly took my presentation, put it in my Dropbox, sent it to me, and then off he went. Contexts have changed in the libraries. Contexts have also changed in terms of school leadership. In my mind, the most important relationship that a principal can forge in a school is that relationship with the librarian. Because if we're talking about making educational change, if we're talking about changing the culture of a school, we're talking about it has to go through the librarian and the library. The library is like a kitchen in a house party. It's your nerve center. And to me, that's a big statement. Being Italian, I live in my kitchen. So let's move on. I'm going to focus today on what I think about the BC Ed Plan. Having watched it evolve and grow, it is a living, breathing document. How it impacts the programs of choice within the VSB and the purpose of libraries and what they need to transform into to be relevant at the high school level. And so it's part Pecha Kucha, it's part presentation. So I'm going to read what I've got, so I apologize if I make lack of eye contact. Embracing change, it means daring to be different and accepting that people are always going to strike at your ideas, no matter what your role. It's like a piñata. And that reflecting upon the BC Ed Plan and the impact in Vancouver and in our libraries, I think of the changes that have to take place, and there's four. One, there has to be an altering of pedagogical focus. Two, there has to be a transformation of curriculum delivery. Three, there has to be a change in assessment practices and what now needs to be assessed, which is totally different. And the redefinition of learning spaces and their purposes. It's a change that is going to be painful for some. Now, why? It's because change, moving from the known to the unknown, is always a scary proposition. My 80-year-old neighbor, Fernando, is fond of saying that everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die to get there. And he's so right. So how do we ask educational stakeholders to follow along and embrace change when at the outset all we can offer is the hope of a possibility? And in terms of course offerings in libraries, we show them what could be if we stay in the past, and then what can be if we transform our delivery, our focus, our spaces, and our intent. So what kind of transformative change am I talking about? What exactly do I see in the BC Ed plan? I see a movement from teacher-directed to process and active learning. I see a movement from simple information assignments to complex knowledge construction. I see a change from four-wall learning to networked and global learning. I also see a movement from finding information to learning that explores big ideas and concepts, and most of all, a movement away from isolation to collaborative partnerships. And Moira will tell you that those partnerships aren't that easy to forge at times. No offense. As Seth Rogen is fond of saying, in education we're very good at collecting the dots, but our purpose has to be in connecting the dots. And that for me is where the BC Ed plan has its most merit. For the first time, we're being encouraged by the ministry to connect and not collect. And what I like about that is it's just a matter of time before we can wipe away the provincial exams as well. So what are we being offered right now? One, we are now being invited to focus on the core competencies, skills, and knowledge that students need to succeed in the 21st century. We're now being placed in a position of thinking about what we can add to curriculum to personalize it and make it more relevant to the learner. And finally, we're no longer asking that educational question that is as old as time. How can I possibly cover it all? We're going to wipe that away. And hopefully one day we'll wipe away what is it worth as well from the student vernacular. So what we've been offered in the past. So let's take a minute and look at what's been offered and take a look at this.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're only boarding rows 9 and above right now. You'll have to wait.
I'm in row 8.
Please step aside, sir.
It's just one row. Don't you make it so big?
We'll call your room momentarily. Step aside, sir. Thank you for waiting. We'd like to continue boarding the aircraft now. We're now boarding all rows, please. All remaining rows. Hello. Enjoy your flight.
What we've had in the past is a one-size-fits-all curriculum that doesn't take into account individual contexts. Now, for those of you who have seen the movie, the plane ride doesn't work out too well for Ben Stiller. He gets on and he goes ape and goes postal, if you will, and off he gets taken off the plane. Same can be said for that struggling student in A&W Math or Communications 11. That same student who either gives up or stops attending or turns to violence. And so now we have an alternative that allows us to create with impunity educational plans that are outside of the box and that in working for kids, hopefully will also work for teachers. So a new type of learning. In the BC Ed plan, what's not to like? It asks us to blend content retention, which is a static pursuit, with skill development, which is ongoing and evolving. It recognizes the fact that students are becoming not only better thinkers, but also makers, doers, and problem solvers. It fosters innovative learning experiences that are built on educational strategies emphasizing inquiry, collaboration, and active engagement. The triad of the librarian. Holy one as well. It encourages us to teach students and our professional peers how to frame problems, generate ideas, refine solutions, collaborate with experts, and share results. And finally, word for word, it facilitates a problem-solving process that as a learning process is content neutral. What that means for me is that it's the process more than the product. It's about a process being multi-applicable and not being rained down by content-specific demands. So why? Why are we trying to change anything at all? What's driving the movement? Is it just another ministry document? And so for me, I personalize it. My daughter Lauren is a great athlete. She's even a better student. highest GPA in her grade, straight A student. She still has a vendetta out for her grade 5 teacher who gave her a B in French, and that's going to be lifelong, right? She's a great student, but is she a great thinker? Can she synthesize information? And these are all things that really, skills that are imparted in a library. Can she synthesize information and stretch it in new and unexpected directions? Can she pursue inquiry-based learning and invite others along within the discourse? Is she discovering what it is that engages her intellectually, and is she being provided these opportunities in her school? You see, Lauren's going to become more informed and better connected to others around the world than at any time in history. She's going to be asked to blend herself in a world that's both physical and virtual, and she'll be expected to access and organize more information than any of her predecessors before her. And is she going to be ready for that level of information and interconnection? The fact that she has access to more information, the fact that kids can go into a library and know how to Google something, doesn't mean that they're living the dream. They're just getting a bunch of random, useless information that really isn't helping them dig deeper into inquiry. So is she going to know how to organize it, make sense of it, find meaning within it, and become a good thinker? Compounding the issue in our schools is that we don't consistently help the Laurens of the world acquire the requisite literacies through the use of technology, which is, in effect, their second skin. So how are we going to prepare them for an uncertain future with multiple career paths, where they'll change jobs at least half a dozen times? How are we going to prepare for a future where technical knowledge doubles every 2 years? And this is where the BC Ed plan comes in. We pay attention to the skills that surround the content. The content, like the information on the web, is going to change radically over time. But the skills will get you through. Change the focus on ways of doing that will be transferable in an age of ever-changing and increasingly sophisticated product. Move from a focus on content retention to a focus on skill acquisition. And we move from finding information to discovering knowledge. So, in other words, in order to get there, what we need to do is we need to help both adults and students, and I would say even adults more than students, discover their inner Rosies.
I'm there, and there's this kind of stick thing that we really don't know what kind of insect it is. It has legs, and I don't know what it is. And this other one, there's some dog, and they swim around and stuff in the sink. Then they put the dog in the back sink, and then when the horse was still running, because he's really strong, and he pulled the elephant. And you know what Mom thought that they were supposed to bring.
So if you catch the end of it, she says, well, first of all, she's passionate about learning, right? You know, but at the end of it, if you listen, she says, and Mom thought. She's already down the path of inquiry, citing, and hopefully, I always make sure my wife isn't in here, questioning secondary sources. Now, see, for Rosie, there's no formal education system. Nothing needs to change because every interaction is grounded in new knowledge. You brought up, Blair, the quote about is that grade 12 going to have that wide-eyed look at the goldfish in grade 12? This is what we're talking about. But for me, I think it's more relevant for teachers than it is for the kids. That the teachers are the ones that have to discover what they're passionate about. And within that discovery, be able to teach it. And the BC Ed plan allows them to do that. It allows them to follow a passion. It allows them to create curriculum, to create an experience, and not follow a content-heavy curriculum. Our problem has been that the new knowledge has always been clouded by curriculum coverage. But now, and I really don't need to say anything that can be sound on this one, this is the problem. We no longer have to view a provincial exam as an albatross around our necks. We don't have to listen to, I have to teach 100% of the time for 20% of the final grade. We shouldn't have to ask students to fill in the blanks anymore with the names and dates of long-forgotten battles. And probably the best of all, man, why is there even a Scantron in a school anymore? However, here's the dilemma. There's a big gap between saying we must encourage creativity, collaboration, and innovation, and teaching both students and teachers how to actually generate, execute, and assess original ideas and critical skills. We're asking them to move to a whole new context, a whole new paradigm, and there's nothing there to help them get there. The second one, the crowded day. How do we get great ideas and ways of doing that could spring out of the BC Ed plan and not get teachers to view them as just another add-on in an already busy day? And the last one is the albatross was actually an anchor. For some people, the content was their security blanket, and like Linus, they're not going to let go. They say they don't want it, but that's what's been kept them rooted in the classroom. So how do you get beyond that? I'll give you my perspective in terms of what I do. And if you look at my role, it's really a bunch of everything, which is great because no one really knows what I do. And I have zero optical presence, so I can just kind of wander around like the shadow and go and work with teachers in schools. But let's look at this, and let's focus on a small one. That's mini schools. For me, the BC Ed plan lends itself very well to, I got PBL up here as project-based learning, but it's all under the umbrella of inquiry. You can call it project, you can brand it by Apple and call it challenge, whatever you want to call it. It's all inquiry-based learning. And these are the 5 things that I think lend themselves very well through the BC Ed plan. And so what are we doing? Give you a quick example. Mini schools. It's supposed to be mini schools, not and schools. There are mini schools have been around in Vancouver since the late 80s, early 80s more, I think. Yeah. And they're for accelerated or enriched classes for bright kids who come in. And so teachers have the best kids in the school, not your smoke pit kids, in their classroom, doing their homework prepared. But the issue is nothing has changed in terms of delivery. It's either more of the same old stuff, moving faster and quicker, but it's nothing in terms of delivery. So what we did last year is I took four of the mini schools, and we mucked around for a while. We looked at what we thought core competencies, what core competencies had to be met for kids grade 8, 9, 10, and how we could go about doing it in a different manner. And we kept going round and round and talking about it. Finally, we just said, you know what, let's just do it. Let's say after spring break, we're going to do 6 weeks of project-based learning. We're going to close it down, and we're going to do project-based learning with our kids. Scary proposition. Kids loved it. Teachers kind of had trouble with it because what it also meant was meeting every morning and collaborating and talking about what you were doing and coming up with a plan. And really it became project-based something. But that's okay. The product really wasn't that great, but the process was fantastic. And understanding that letting go means controlled chaos, that things can happen. And so what's happened this year is 3 of those schools, the other ones are still running and hiding, the 3 of the 4 schools have decided to move forward. And we have a whole new, the applied skills is the last of the curriculums that's being rewritten right now. And so what they've done in their grade 8 classes, and they started with grade 8, they've taken their applied skills class and changed it to an exploratory block. And it's going to be driven thematically by what's happening in their cluster of classes, the mini schools that we're dealing with, English, socials, and science. And so they're going to get skills in the exploratory block that are applied skills-based, woodwork, metalwork, what have you, but it's being driven thematically. The content they're going to create is going to be coming out of the classes over here. What that means is you've got cross-pollination between 3 academics and an applied skills person. Applied skills are happy because their numbers are going to go up now, but what it also does is it changes the context. It changes the idea of what it means to create content. That's no longer done in isolation. It's done in partnership. So let's look at the dots and connect them right now. A story from Killarney. They started with project-based learning, which is science-based, science, English, and math, or science, English, and socials with an exploratory block. They're working up now towards 11 and 12. And 11 and 12, which will happen in a couple of years, they're looking at biology as their driver. So in grade 11, where biology is plant-based, it's going to be biology with environmental studies, socials, and English all together. And that environmental studies is going to be your project-based learning block. And now you've got all this is happening under the auspices of the librarian. This is where, because they're the experts in inquiry. And so they're working on developing that. Over at Gladstone, they do an accelerated program where they finish 3 years in 2.5. And what they wanted to do at January of the grade 10 year was pile more stuff on these kids. Let's give them a head start. Let them go to semester courses and do English 11, 12. But the argument is you're moving so fast, you haven't gone in depth in terms of really peeling away the onion and finding out what's underneath it. So what they're going to do from January until the end of June, they're going to call it the Renaissance Workshops. Nothing but project-based learning across the board, and teachers are going to be coming together and say, we want to do this for 6 weeks, we want to do this for 8 weeks, and create. At Templeton, they're moving somewhere totally even different, I should say. They have a a project-based block in 8 and 9, and they're moving to an engineering sampler in grade 10. And in grade 11 and 12, they're going to form the first STEM school in British Columbia, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. And the technology piece is going to be where the computer programming, the project takes place. So there's things that are being done that really kind of follow Gardner's continuum of, where is it? There we go. Of depth, creativity, and innovation, right? And the nice thing about it, though, it's changing how we view professional capital and how to build professional capital. It's moving the discussions away from collegial or congenial, what movie did you see this weekend, to actually collegial. I just went to a museum this weekend. I was really excited about what I saw. What do you think we can do in math and science with it? Can we do a project around it? Now I have the license as a teacher to actually have these discussions and create. And what are we talking about? Passionate teachers, engaged students, rigor, and work that's worth doing. Oh, let's go back. No. Come on. Let's try it again. Sorry. I might have to skip it. Nothing. Okay, it's all right. So, passion. What was going to happen was you were going to hear Larry Rosenstock from High Tech High speak about rigor, and he was going to say that how do we know a teacher is a good teacher? If the kid is doing work that's worth doing, if the teacher is passionate and they come in and they're inviting kids along into this adult discourse. And for me, that's what the BC Ed plan allows us to do. It's a living, breathing document. And for me, we've started small with the mini schools. If we want to look at change at a macro level, it has to happen through the libraries. And what I mean by that is, in order to incorporate and put the BC Ed plan into practice, the libraries have to turn into learning commons. They can be your librarian Dewey Decimal System, here's the book, here's a CD, and off you go. It's got to be the place where the collaborative dynamics of the library and technology-rich labs meet. It's got to be a place where librarians morph into learning coaches and knowledge brokers. There's absolutely no reason why in any staff meeting, in any school in the province of British Columbia, that a librarian is not a lined item in that staff meeting, talking about what they're doing in the library, what resources are new, and what projects are coming forward. Absolutely no reason. And it's absolutely shameful if it's not happening, in my opinion. Again, Maureen, that's my opinion, not VSB opinion. It's a space, as Moira will say, that's characterized by hum, hub, and not hush. It's a space that promotes professional inquiry, a space where teachers are working and other teachers can come in and have their coffee and actually become part of the conversation. It's a space where teachers learn from librarians how to frame problems, generate ideas, refine solutions, and collaborate. So, consider this from a traditional perspective from a student. Wakes up tired, late, hungry, stumbling to school, worried about the science lesson in the library. He says, oh man, I'm going to fail that. I didn't memorize the vocabulary. I can't remember the habitat of the coyote. I'm skipping out. Happens every day. Student gets a 0 on the test, is disengaged from school, couldn't care less about the coyote, so you get the idea. Student in a Vancouver school learning commons. Wakes up tired, late, hungry, stumbling to school, worried about being late, and disappointing the teacher. Isn't today's topic to be about the habitat? Getting off the bus, bleary-eyed, student spies a skinny dog in the cemetery. Out comes the iPhone, video is on, whoa, that's a coyote. Student jumps the fence, pursues at a distance, video rolling. Follows the coyote to the den, sees the pups ripping apart a neighborhood cat. Okay? He arrives late to class. Student interrupts the chaotic setting because it's in a learning commons. There's lots of noise. And he demands everyone's attention. He hooks up his iPhone to a projector, and this is a true story, and shows live footage. Forget YouTube. This is real life. Discussion follows extensions, excitement, and kids now are off on their own doing projects based on what they've just seen. Should we kill the coyotes in the cemetery? What do they live in? Install a webcam. Where will the babies go? Both these students were late. Only one student was successful. How do we enable the excitement of learning? How do we teach the pursuit of knowledge and learning and limit the regurgitation of facts that are easy to look up on an iPod? And once we do that, how do we assess it? And the example touches upon a very specific point. Libraries and schools should reflect the world we live in today. And we live in a social world. We need to teach students how to be effective collaborators in that world and to interact with people around them, real and virtual. We need to reframe social networking as academic networking. We need to offer ourselves and students radically new ways to research, create, and learn. And we need to realize that the BC Ed Plan is espousing is simply this, that the acquisition of knowledge is now an open, transparent, non-hierarchical, interactive, and real-time process. Nobody owns it. We all create it. We are one giant Wikipedia. And the Learning Commons is a great starting point when we talk about the how. Because like all documents that come forward that espouse change, it's the how. And the Learning Commons is the nerve center of the school. It's the place where learning isn't about collecting, but connecting through cross-curricular partnerships. And this is what I like to tell people in many schools, and I say the same thing about Learning Commons. It's our experiment lab. It's the place where you take brand new educational research and you muck around with it. You play with it, and you discover new ways of doing school. And for every success you have, you'll have 4 failed experiments. But they're not failed experiments, they're learning opportunities. And that's what the Learning Commons can actually create. It can change the culture of the school by reframing what a failure is. And that's all part of the learning process. For me, it provides a roadmap for teachers that this is what innovation and the BC Ed Plan looks like to us. This is how it engages students in the Learning Commons. And now that you have seen it, this is how you can implement facets of what you've seen in my Learning Commons in your classroom. It starts here to germinate, and it builds out to you. And I started with her, I'll end with her, but this time I made sure my son was there as well because he got a little upset that he wasn't there the first time. That the ultimate impact that the BC Ed Plan is going to have on school libraries in providing the impetus to transform a school library into a Learning Commons, the BC Ed Plan in effect becomes that living document, and it sets the stage for good things to happen. It reshapes, what I like to say, it reshapes our system into a new normal, and it provides us with a real hope of a concrete possibility. So my feeling is that librarians right now are at the fore of the BC Ed Plan. If there isn't a concerted plan in a school between an administrator and a librarian in terms of how can we unravel this and unpack this BC Ed Plan so that it's not just a document but actually is making an impact in our delivery and in our assessment, then it will not happen. And so the struggle here for me and the fear is it's going to ask even more of librarians. But it's going to ask more in a way that's going to make your jobs even that much more exciting, that much more purposeful, and that much more important in terms of defining who you are, not only as an educator, but as a human being. So thank you very much.
So Patricia, I really want to thank you very much for being here. Patricia Finley is the district teacher librarian for the Burnaby School District. And I also have to thank Patricia because I phoned her in the summer and we were planning our event for School Library Day, colloquial. And it was in discussions with Patricia that we decided to focus on the new BC Education Plan. And so I really thank you for that, Patricia, because I think it's a rich discussion. We could probably have a whole 2-day workshop on it. And just even thinking about the transformative nature of the BC, the new Education Plan is really, really an important one. Patricia has worked tirelessly as a teacher librarian. She's been part of our UBC Information Literacy Project. She has volunteered her time working with our secondary teacher candidates. And she has been a keen advocate for school library programs. And I always remember reading an article of hers that she wrote as part of the Critical Thinking Consortium, which it sort of turned on light bulbs for a lot of us as teacher librarians in terms of moving our research questions and research assignments that we use with children and young adults and moving them so that they would become what the Critical Thinking Consortium calls critical challenges. In other words, there isn't a right or wrong answer. There is something more to dig for. It is a deeper understanding. And then that process of inquiry becomes really, really rich. And she has understood that very clearly for a long time. And she has been an editor and author of some of the units for the TC Squared, what's called the Critical Thinking Consortium in British Columbia. And she states that teacher librarians support critical thinking by integrating instruction of the critical thinking tools into research activities and by providing a diverse range of learning resources. And she does that in all of her work. She's worked as a principal, she's worked as a teacher, she's worked as a teacher librarian, and she's working now as a district teacher librarian for the Burnaby School District. This Friday at the BC Teacher Librarians Association conference, she's presenting a session called Inquiry plus Critical Thinking equals Critical Inquiry. So please help me in welcoming Patricia Finley.
Well, following these two eloquent gentlemen is going to be very hard. I was saying to Gino before he left, I wish we could just clone him and send him out to every school in British Columbia to have somebody with that vision and that knowledge of the role of teacher librarians in the library program. So I went and looked at the document called the BC's Education Plan, and all these gentlemen have talked about it, to actually look at the document itself. And because I discussed with Joanne that I would be coming to do this presentation, I have an advantage being the district teacher librarian that I can do activities with all the teacher librarians in the district. So guess what they did in September? We read the BC Education Plan, and I posed to them, we reflected and discussed it. So a lot of the comments that are coming in this presentation actually come from them, not just from me. So I thought, first of all, what do we already do well? What's the tradition of libraries? And that's reading and learning, in school libraries, learning to read. And we support the classroom teacher in that. And we have our collections that kids come and choose books from, and we help them become better readers, decoders. And after they know how to read, then we know they need to use the reading to learn. And they come back to the library, and this time it might not be reading the novel, but it is reading for information, reading off computers, reading from all different places, and then putting that together. And I think the thing that we pride ourselves on, above all, is that we try to show that being able to read, it's a love affair, being a reader. And I know that classroom teachers work on that also, but I think it's when you come to the school library, the public library, that we celebrate reading. And just in this slide, I've picked a few different events that have happened in some of our secondary schools. Speed book dating. And in Burnaby, we have a reads program at all our secondary schools, so they launch their books every year in the fall. We've talked about the Learning Commons. And I think there's a lot of teacher librarians out there that are still trying to figure out what does that mean, Learning Commons. And when you talk about what happens in the Learning Commons, say, well, I'm sort of doing that now, so how is it different? Because we really do see ourselves as teaching kids how to learn. It's learning how to learn. Together for Learning is a document that was prepared by the Ontario School Library Association, and if you're not familiar with it, it's a great place to go and look at a practical document about what the Learning Commons is. And the reason I put these comments down is I want to connect what they're saying for describing the Learning Commons with what's written in the BC Ed Plan. So we talked about curriculum that's personalized. We look at attending to all the needs of the students. We talk about flexibility, and we talk about technology. So what are the 5 key elements that are in the BC Ed Plan? The same things, almost, that we talked about for Learning Commons. So what I did with the teacher librarian group is I put them into little groups. I gave them one of the key elements and said, how do school libraries support that key element of the BC Ed Plan? Now, the way the Ed Plan's written, if you've actually read it, it's quite a political document, and it's kind of controversial, and it has a few statements there that teacher librarians weren't too happy about. But what I said to them is I want you to go past that, and I want you to think about those 5 key elements in the terms, the context of curriculum and instruction. So what is personalized learning? So this is the definition that comes from the Ed Plan. So again, it's student-centered. And we look at all those things like needs, their reading levels, and their passion. So how do school library programs support that? Well, I think the most obvious one is our resources. We have something for everyone. We support the curriculum from K to 12. But a big part of that is we want kids to love to read. We have to have the books they want to read. So we're always looking for what are the hot items and what are the things that kids want to read. We know kids have personal interests and hobbies. They want to be able to find materials that are about those hobbies or interests. So we buy that. So we have a pretty diverse collection. And of course it's gone, past print. We do have the DVDs and the media, but now of course we're going into digital resources as well. What else do we do? Well, we've always prided ourselves on having a place that kids want to be, an inviting and a flexible space. So we actually designed the school library to have places that kids, where they can cozy up with a book, a corner where they can go. And as we talk about the Learning Commons approach, flexibility. We got to be able to move things around so the space can change and accommodate all different kinds of groups, whether it's a full class, little groups. And I read an interesting article about we have to not forget the kid who needs the quiet space. So even though libraries are humming and they've got lots of talk and collaboration, you still need to provide a space for the child who wants that quiet workspace for themselves. What else do we do to support personalized learning? Well, we work with the teachers because guess what? We don't have any kids of our own. The only kids we can work with are those that the teacher brings to us. So collaborative planning and teaching has been around for a long time. We've talked about the Haycocks, the 1970s and on. And the whole premise of that is that the teacher knows the students and their needs, but the teacher librarian knows about resources and about skills and strategies those kids need, and we bring them together. And it's true, as Moira was talking about, it has to go past this sort of surface collaboration where it's, okay, you bring my class in and you teach the first 10 minutes and then you can go away and the kids are fine doing what they're supposed to do in my worksheet that I'll give them. So collaboration has to be deeper than that. But at least getting them in and working with you is the first start. BCTLA, and this has been several years old now, has a document called the Points of Inquiry. And it looks at research as inquiry-based learning. So this document is out there and is familiar to most teacher librarians in the province. And it's a great place to start. If you're not sure about what inquiry is, the support is there. And it's a document then you can share with the teacher when you work with them to talk about how to frame their research project more as an inquiry than just, as Joanne was talking about my article that I wrote, just cut and paste. Too much of what goes on that kids are asked to do these days in terms of research is cut and paste type research projects. We talk about quality teaching and learning. What does that mean, quality teaching and learning? Well, let's just say it's the best teaching practices that we know. So teacher librarians are poised in a very special place. They're probably the only teacher in the whole school that has the opportunity to work with every single teacher and every single child, especially in elementary, and at secondary too, even though there's some departments that tend not to see as the library is within their sphere of interest. We work collaboratively with our colleagues, so we have that chance. And we mentor. We mentor each other, and we can mentor teachers, staff, and students. So we are in a special place, and I think that's why Gino said that the principal should be looking at the teacher librarian as really the leader, the teacher leader in their school, because they have all these opportunities built in as part of their role. You don't have to create time for them to do it because that's what they should be doing. Flexibility and choice. Well, naturally, we go back to our collection again. We encourage kids to pick what they want to read, and we get students to suggest things that we have for the collection. The other thing is today, we're open all the time. Our catalogs are web-based. We have all our databases, online encyclopedias, other tools that we have are there. And the students should know I can just go to either the blog, the library website, or in the catalog and click, and there it is. And we also try to give students access to the library outside of instructional time. And that, of course, will vary from district to district and at the discretion of the teacher librarian. So high standards, again, what does that mean by high standards? So let's just think about quality. So what do we try to do? Have a quality collection. We try to give individualized attention to the students. And a side comment here, often the unique, somewhat eccentric kids in the school what's the place they feel the most comfortable? They come to the library. And I'm sure if you're in a public library situation, you notice that too. They feel that it's a safe place for them to be, and they're always welcome there. And to get students to develop those skills. So as Gina was talking about, it's the process. It's not the product at the end. The process of learning how to learn is what's most important. We work with those teachers. So what can we do? So again, we're poised that when they bring that cut and paste research project to us, that we can try in a diplomatic way to say, gee, maybe we could tweak this way. Maybe we could try that this time. Have you ever thought about doing, an exit slip before they go out the door, et cetera, et cetera? So being familiar with all the things that are going on these days around critical thinking, inquiry, assessment, differentiated learning, et cetera, we have that opportunity to actually help teachers develop that. Technology. Well, technology in many ways has become, for some teacher librarians, a kind of a savior, because they have become the tech experts in their school, which brings the teachers into the door. We have one school in Burnaby that on purpose went and bought a class set of iPads that are for in the library, and they've gone out to all the departments and they have said, I bet you we can find some way for your class to use the iPads. And of course the teachers are keen because iPads are the new thing, and so they come down to the library. So some people have embraced that technology. But we do try to show kids how you integrate online resources into your repertoire. And we also, maybe we're one of the few people that talks about the ethical use of technology in others' work. We've always, of course, been the person who taught the bibliography lesson. And we're trying to move past that to broader about the ethical use of information. We're also one of the few places where maybe there's actually open access to technology. In the secondary school where I work a day a week, at lunchtime all the computer labs are locked. If a student wants to come and do some work, the only place they can come is to the library. Students who may not have a printer at home, they come to the library to print their assignment in the morning so they can hand it in. So we do offer that equitable access. And we focus on evaluating the resources and doing effective searching. And we had a little chat before this session started, and they were talking about even how university students have perhaps some need of learning how to do better searches for information. And now, of course, we look at all the web tools and apps that are out there, and we can actually show kids how to use them. So now where are we at? So the BC Ed Plan, as you pointed out, is 2 years old. And it's we've moved on from there. And in fact, yesterday, they posted the new curriculum, the drafts. So I had a chance very quickly to look at. There's 3 curriculums that are there now: English Language Arts, Social Studies, and Math, and others to come. And there's buttons that are still lacking some links, but it's there. And it's looking again at the big ideas, the competencies, the skills, not the content so much anymore, fewer but higher level outcomes. And I know, as Gina was saying, there's going to be some scared teachers out there. What do I do? I have got all my units prepared. I can check off every learning outcome in the IRP. So what am I going to do now? So again, I think teacher librarians are well placed to help those teachers. Let's look at it differently and see what we can do. And I just got a couple of samples of some words from those. This is what I love from the English Language Arts. This is a big idea from K to 9. Language and literature help us find meaning and joy. And as a teacher librarian, I just went, yes, that's what we've been about for years and years. And then from the social studies, it talks about using inquiry and deeper understanding. And in the math even, it talks about how you can use information collected and represented in different ways. So all those infographics that we're seeing now, what a great way for kids to show information. So I'm really excited. And as I said, a lot of these comments came from the teacher librarian group. And so they see that we are already doing things that support where we're going with the BC Ed Plan and where we're going with the curriculum. They also do see that there's challenges there. And as much as we talk about the teacher librarian becoming a leader, unless we have Rubens and Ginos that are out there talking, we still have school districts with limited or no teacher librarian time. We have to be, realistic about it. But I think we're well placed with all the things that are happening for the library programs to be leaders in moving into the new curriculum. So thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Gino had to leave for his daughter's basketball game. So we're very sorry. But I'm just thinking we have about 6 minutes, and if you have some questions that are percolating, this is your chance to ask them, or if you have comments. Yeah.
Patricia, could I see your slide? You made reference to a slide maybe 8 or so in, how you found alignment between the education plan and the learning commons.
Okay.
And then you expanded on it, but it was...
Right. So it was from the, let's just see if I can find it.
Or just before you went on to explain.
So there is the Learning Commons. This comes from the OSLA document, Together for Learning. So they just had this descriptor, and I've just taken out some of the key things. So the Learning Commons, I think that concept fits perfectly with what we're trying to do with our curriculum.
And I appreciate you drawing our attention to that, because I think we do need to self-advocate. And I think it's like perfect timing. It was released yesterday. It's October's the month to read. We're going to our conference in a couple days. So yeah, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So I'm interested, Ruben, how do you see the new education plan rolling out and being implemented? Do you see any kinds of things that will be drastically different for districts?
I was saying to Joanna, we regretted fairly early on calling it a plan, right? Because then the immediate response was, well, if this was a plan, it doesn't say how you're going to do all this stuff. And what it really has always been intended to, as Gino said, a living document, right? And more of a guiding vision for the system. It says, here's where we think we all need to start working towards this. But it was never intended for us to say, and this was unusual for the Ministry of Education, I think, based on past practice, to say, we have a plan, and here's how you're going to do it. You will do X, Y, and Z. Good luck. Right? And so I think that was some expectation that we would sort of mandate, here's how you will transform the system. And for once, we decided to actually do it very differently and actually go out and try and work with our partners in the system, saying, do we all agree generally this is the direction we should go? How will we get there? And I think the curriculum work is a great example of that. In some ways, it's disconcerting to not have the answers. But the way that process has unfolded has been, our educators within the ministry working with educators in the field and saying, okay, here's the concept. Now help us figure out how this is going to work in a way that is actually going to be great for students, but is actually going to be useful and empowering and enabling for you as teachers. And that's the kind of approach we're trying to take with all the different streams of this. It's messy, because you don't always know how long it's going to take or where exactly it's going to take you. And you can't do it all at once. There's so many different streams to this. So curriculum is a focus. Assessment, Rod Allen will say, if we had done it right, we would have done them together. It would make sense for those two pieces. They actually are so close to them. So there is work going on in assessment, but it's the curriculum is sort of proceeding first. But there's work, I think Dean Frank from here and Chris Magnuson, the Dean at SFU, are both co-chairing some work around a discussion around assessment. So that's happening. They're looking at grad standards. We're having ongoing discussions, trying to figure out how we actually tackle that teacher quality piece, which is really about enabling teachers to succeed in a different kind of system. So there is sort of no clear cut. Here is the implementation plan for how we're going to do this. It's a much more collaborative process than that, which is challenging, but at the same time, I think will get us to a better place. Curriculum, now that the drafts are out, they're inviting comment and feedback on those drafts, and at the same time working around, so then how do we actually support teachers in making this real in the classroom too? So that work is also being developed. But it's an unusual process for us, but we think is ultimately going to be much more successful. That makes sense.
So thank you, and I was going to call on Eric just to bring closure to our time together.
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
thank you.
thank you.
Yeah.
So while I was listening, I had the opportunity to write down a few notes and take just a couple of themes that emerged from the conversation for me. Ruben, I'm sorry I missed your talk. I was teaching. So that's right. I was here for at least the last couple of talks, and that gave me some ideas, some sense of the conversation. I wanted to just to point out some things that at least stood out for me in terms of the meaning of this event and what we can take away from it as participants. The first theme that really jumped out at me is research assignments and research tasks that we've had, even in our libraries in the past, have in some ways been miseducative for young people. Okay, so if we go back to the Deweyan notion of what's an educative experience versus what's a miseducative experience, the miseducative experience is that stifles their curiosity. The kind of assignment that takes them away from those inquiry practices of wanting to know at a really deep level what's going on. And instead they cut and paste, or what we ask them to do is really to recreate the sort of encyclopedic content. Here, write a 2-page paper on Bolivia. Like, well, the encyclopedia already has a 2-page treatment on Bolivia, and so why should they create something brand new when it's already there? Hence, cut and paste. Okay? So we need to challenge ourselves as professionals to look at some of the practices that we've employed in libraries and say, are we really challenging young people with our inquiry tasks? And are we making those experiences educative, not miseducative? The second theme that came through very loudly in all of the talks that I've heard was that content is no longer king. That inquiry practices are the new coin of the realm, and it's not about how much content you can memorize, but how you can solve ill-structured problems, how you can take an abstract problem space and make something of it, how you can really take new knowledge out of a set of facts and figures, do something unique with it. And I think that's fantastic. However, I want to remind everyone that even though inquiry models are meant to be abstract, they're not meant to be decontextualized, in the sense that we can't teach inquiry in the abstract, in the perfect abstract. But instead, what we have to do is we have to ground these research tasks and these inquiry tasks in authentic assignments, things that actually challenge students to do real problems, that engage them in real ways. Because I think one of the things that we miss sometimes when we're in school, particularly in K-12, is the idea that doctors and lawyers and computer scientists and all these very specialized tasks, they actually solve problems in different ways. Even though they may use similar inquiry practices, they have different notions of what an authoritative resource looks like, what a relevant resource looks like, what a credible resource looks like, and we need to teach these sorts of tasks in context so they make sense to people once they're done with their schooling. And then finally, I would like to say that a theme that is really important to me as we reimagine the library as the learning commons, both as a physical learning commons, a place where people physically come together to do inquiry tasks, as well as a digital learning commons, this space in the cloud where we come together from all parts of the world to engage in scholarly productivity. We have to reconsider as library professionals what our roles really look like and where we want to spend our time. Because doing things like changing toner cartridges and ordering books and replacing overhead light bulbs are things that sometimes are really easy to do. They're things that you can check off a list really quickly. Okay? They're also things that teachers love us for. Okay? As a former teacher librarian, I know that just making sure that everything runs and everything hums makes you feel good, it makes the teachers feel good, but that's not the best use of your time. It's not the best use of your time at all. We need to focus actually on training teachers to create better assignments. And that can only come from people who really know how to do high-quality inquiry tasks. And that's teacher librarians. So what's the best use of our time, and how are we going to do it, is the challenge for the future. And I think that all of our speakers today really challenged us to think deeply about how we're going to do that. So please, a round of applause for our